Brian, just start by telling us, what's Raise Your Flag?
So Raise Your Flag is a web application to help the 45% of high school kids in North America that don't go to university or college as their primary post-secondary destination, to explore careers that don't require a degree or diploma, to find out the career path to those destinations, and then to connect with the companies and the job openings for those career paths.
How much success are you having?
So we launched version 1 last year at South by Southwest EDU, collected a few pilots, saw that the education market is the biggest, slowest moving beast on the planet. The sales process, the sales cycle is like 4 years long. I could have 5 kids by the time that anything's purchased. We decided to take a shift to version 2, which takes the companies who see a need for these young people coming into their ecosystems and help close the gap. So for example, companies like Air Canada can come to us and say, here are all the career paths within our company that don't require a degree or diploma. Here are the descriptions for them. Bring us people that want to be here. And the hypothesis is if they want to be there, they're going to stay there longer, and it works out better for everybody.
Making any money yet?
We're almost there.
Almost there.
It's a startup, right? It's a startup. So that's the process, is you have a bunch of hypotheses, you get people that believe in you, and you put the thing out there and you look at the data. And then every decision you make is based on data.
Good. Good luck. Representing the biggest, slowest beast in the business here is Linda Franklin.
That was planned, by the way. I don't want you guys to think.
That was not planned. That was all spontaneous.
Proudly representing them.
Proudly representing. Well, okay. Let's hit this on the head since the gauntlet has been thrown down here. Do you think that your colleges are providing the appropriate education we need for young people who are looking for jobs in a miserable economy at the dawn of the 21st century?
Well, thanks for that, Steve.
Yes, how about that happy outlook?
You know, honestly, I think that more than any other time since Bill Davis brought in the college system 47 years ago, this is our time. I think we're exactly positioned appropriately because we build curriculum with program advisory groups that include employers. We are more nimble, maybe, than the purchasing departments you've been dealing with. We often change programs because we see an employment need in our local communities, and right now the employer requests for more and more highly skilled workers appropriate to their job site, I think means that colleges are the right answer today, or at least a big part of the answer.
A big part of the answer. Nitin, what are you seeing?
Well, I think as someone who's committed to this province and this country in terms of doing a lot of hiring over the next little while, we're actually quite concerned in our ability to fill those spots. That we'll need everything from undergrads to masters to PhDs, but also folks that maybe didn't go that route but have the appropriate certifications. So, we saw this challenge, if I could just tell a quick story. We saw this challenge quite long ago, 95, 96, when we saw the internet going through the roof. We did a quick calculation, because everything at Cisco is about scale, and we did a quick calculation. If this market, our company, keeps growing the way it does, there wouldn't be enough humans on the planet to feed that growth or that's going on. And some of that is going on right now. So we created a program quite a few years ago called the Network Academies in the late 90s. And through that program, through high school and college kids, we've put about 122,000 kids through that program. 22,000 are currently in that program today. And this is offered in colleges, in high schools, and it gets them the appropriate certifications. So I think we need more of that, more of this partnership between corporations, universities, colleges, and so to me, I'd like to see a lot more of that occur, and I'm concerned that not enough of it is occurring.
But I'm inferring from your answer that you're doing that because you didn't think that the official, in inverted commas, post-secondary system in Ontario was getting the job done adequately.
Or quite frankly, around the world, right? I mean,
or anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Rick Waugh, from your perch working at the bank all those years, did you find that when people came to you for jobs, the education system had adequately prepared them for what you wanted them to do?
No, they hadn't. No, they certainly hadn't, and still haven't. And I'm not blaming anybody, but that's the challenge we have to face us. And just as an aside, because I didn't want to, I think history's a great teacher. I really do. I think we can learn a lot by what went on in the past, so I don't think there's anything wrong to understand what at least the Canadian history is about.
Hear, hear.
In making better people. So anyhow, let's not get into that. Well, we should maybe. So my focus on this is, in business, we all want to do what our customers want us to do. So the first thing you try to do is you say, well, what do our customers want to do? What does the client want to do? But we haven't done that a lot in education. We haven't even done that, in the discussion so far. So hopefully this discussion can talk about what does the customer want. And whether you be a public sector employer or a private sector employer, we have, and this is the great thing about the learning partnership, we have to be part of what's they call it now, part of the conversation, right? And I just don't think that that has happened. And partly is our problem with the employer. But we all know, what I heard earlier on is, what we have to do is match demand and supply. And what I heard was in the discussion was what I call sort of supply economics. The supply is coming, and we know it. Look at lawyers. Our friend over there who's becoming a lawyer, and I wish you well. But I think one of the biggest, and I just went on the board of governors at York, where I graduated, and sort of because we have Osgood. Every year we get a whole new crop of lawyers coming. We haven't placed last year's crop yet. I mean, most of the lawyers last year, great educated people and did all the thing, a large number of them today haven't got a job. So what is the goal of education? It's so that we as individuals can have a meaningful career, a job, a career, and what have you. Again, that could mean a lot of different things, but that's the goal. We have unemployment. And we have unemployment in the young group. I don't know what the number is. It's 7% broad. We have a huge gap, and the supply keeps coming. And so we have to be much more flexible, much more flexible. The how, this is why we got great people in the room, but it is a huge problem. Education, teachers. My kids one of them's marrying a teacher who can't find a job. And you know what? We're going to bring a lot more. So I think, and there's no wrong. The business model is wrong, because I'm learning at York, and the governor is, if you're a dean or whatever, you need more students because you get more money. But we haven't placed the ones we've got.
But Rick, does this problem go away once the economy improves and all the boomers retire and then open up all those job spots for those graduates?
Well, if you read The Economist, this isn't going to happen for at least 5 years. The new normal, as we say in the economy, is 5 years away. Yeah. And this is Canada, and we're in a good, I'm very optimistic on Canada, but even when us in Canada, we're 5 years. So we have problems we have to address next year. This year, next year, and we have to find a way to get our educational system with all the great issues. And look, we all want innovation, but Scotia has 85,000 employees, about 45,000 here in Canada, and we want people who make good decisions. But let's face it, most of our employees aren't going to be great innovators, but they come out with the expectations. When I went to MBA school, we were all taught how to be a CEO. Well, it took me 30 years. I started as a teller. It took me 30 years, and yet the expectations from when I went to school and got my MBA at York. And so there's this mismatch. So we have to listen to our customers.
Linda wants to react to what you've got to say here. Go
Well, I
ahead.
was just going to say, Steve, you asked, will it be fixed in 5 years? And I think you're right. Demographics are going to solve some of our problem. But I think you're hearing from Rick Miner later, and one of the things that he pointed out is just because you have a whole bunch of jobs without people to fill them doesn't mean that people have the right skills and qualifications to do those jobs. So I do think even when the demographics shift and there are lots of jobs available, we will have to do a better job of partnering with industry to make sure that kids have the right skills. And I take a bit of exception. I don't think the fact that employers like Cisco are doing these sorts of training and certification, I don't think that's a bad thing, and I don't think it means that post-secondary isn't doing its job. I think you need those partnerships. We are never going to train all of our young people in post-secondary to do the exact thing that individual businesses need them to do on the shop floor. That requires a partnership. And I think businesses moved away from that model for a while, for a few decades, and now we're starting to come back because they need specifically trained young people. High skills are more in demand. And so I think we are starting to move towards a better sense of partnership around what can we contribute as post-secondary institutions, what sort of specific training do employers have to step up and think about, and how do we work together to make sure that it's seamless?
But let me follow up on I think a really good question that Rick asked, which is what does the customer want? And do we have are we confused in the post-secondary world about who the customer is? Who's your customer, Linda?
Well, I don't think colleges are confused. Our customers are our students and our employers and our communities. So our model doesn't look the same as university models do. So we don't have as much trouble shedding programs where there are no jobs available. We don't have problems building new curriculum and bringing it in quickly. So a good example for us is years ago there was a panel of IT specialists because there was starting to be a problem with availability of labor for IT. And they came to us and said, well, why aren't you training more IT folks? And we said, well, our students understood that for many years there were no jobs in IT. And so we don't have programs available in places where there are no jobs, because the only reason colleges exist, frankly, are to prepare young people to get good jobs. Now, can we fill every hole and make sure that every student is perfectly prepared for every work environment? No. But I think we can do a pretty good job of listening, and we embed employers in our program advisory committees.
Nitin wants to react now to what you're
So
saying.
just a couple of observations. As you know, we work with high schools, colleges, polytechnics, universities, and the only commonality is there's no commonality. You know, there's a complete disconnect from where I sit. That there should be a flow, right? You know, high schools to colleges, you know, high schools to universities, high schools to polytechnics, and it's not. They're these stovepipes that go this way, and you need some sort of a common thread around that. The other thing is that when you talk to high school kids, they don't really know where the high-paying jobs or where the future is, and I don't think we do a good enough job in directing them. I think what we do is we do a really good job saying, well, you got to have this kind of a percentage to get into this university or to do this or do that, but nobody knows what happens once they go through there. There's no statistics on that says, you know what, I went through a certain college, I got a job within 12 months, and in 5 years, here's where I am, or
Well,
6 years.
they have those stats. You have those stats.
We do have
right? Yeah. So,
So-
you
so
graduate
some-
from a community college and you have a job in your chosen field. What percentage of the time?
Within 6 months, 83.5%. In a recession. Used to be over 90.
Great. So, and they're readily available for the students, and the universities, do they have those same stats too? Because I've not seen them.
Yeah, they have them as well, but I think the point's well taken. Even so, it doesn't mean that a high school student gets appropriate career counseling.
Right.
I mean, my husband used to say, if I knew what engineering was when I was in high school, I would have been an engineer. So I think we have a big gap in helping students understand what careers are available out
Sure.
there, and then marrying those statistics to what they might.
And your comment on IT, just one quick comment on IT. I realized we had the high-tech bubble, right? There was a bubble and it broke. But I think, you know, in all transparency and candor, was myopic to think that this was going to come to an end. This never comes to an end. You know, technology never comes to an end. And for educators to scale back these programs was a bit myopic. And then we're paying for that right now. Because it went like this, you know, mom and dad and advisors said, don't go into that space, there's no jobs. Well, now we've got so many jobs and we don't have the people to fill them.
Ryan and then Rick.
Yeah, so there's really two sides to this, and I think we've touched on a little bit here. But this is really there's two sides to this problem, and there's these places of huge demand. So industries like forestry, where they're going to need like 26,000 new workers by the year 2020. And then there's the supply side, where we need to start sending people who at least know that forestry is an industry and that there are a ton of great opportunities. And it doesn't mean you're going to be cutting down trees for your life. But if that's what you want to do, you can also do that in forestry. And that's just an example of one industry. And then on the supply side, we have a very big problem with, hands up if you've ever seen the movie Braveheart. This is my favorite. Okay, so just about everybody. Longshanks in the movie Braveheart, he's talking about why he can't occupy Scotland. And he says, the trouble with Scotland is that it's full of Scots, which is the perfect impersonation right there. I nailed it. But it really was perfect. And if the problem with education is that it's filled with educators, and it's filled with a group of people that exclusively represent one post-secondary pathway and one pathway only. So the advice that they're giving, by no fault of their own, because that's the world that they know, and educators in the room, you're super happy and successful. I understand why the advice is being given to young people to follow that post-secondary pathway. But we need to start exposing them to the other pathways that exist before they get to semester 2 of grade 12. We need to deepen the career chart starting in elementary school so that the supply side can be groomed from like day 1. When they reach grade 12, they have a bunch of options and a deeper knowledge of what's actually needed and where they can go.
Rick Waugh.
So, taking this point from Linda, I'm going to give you just, again, there's some sort of a business aspect. One thing we learned in the financial crisis that incentives didn't match the desired behavior. And, you know, we had a number of banks and whatever imploded because, you know, the big bonuses were all going. We had too much innovation in financial engineering, right? Derivatives. So that's why I'm a little cautious on innovation, at least in my industry. But, Linda, you came up with a great statistic. You got your colleges, some better than others probably, got an 80% success rate. That should be rewarded. the incentives would be, wow, you placed 8 within a certain period of time, you placed X amount of whatever those goals are, and they got to obviously be laid. That should be rewarded. So we should take, we should take some of that money that's going for the law schools and put it into the colleges. I'm sure you would agree with that one.
Have you talked to Mamdouh Shukri about this yet?
I got a conflict of interest here,
Yeah,
but
no
I'll
kidding.
deal with that one maybe one day later. But right now I'm on the public education. Well, it is all public, but so anyhow. But that's just an example where, and this takes a long thing. We have to match the funding model, which is there, and it's got some great aspects to it, with the realities of the marketplace, the unemployment, and the way this economy. And so if we have part of the education system that's firing on 4 of the 6 cylinders, it'll never be 6. Okay, let's start to move that, and it's hard to move, but it's always follow the money and get
How
the
about
incentives
political
right.
realities? How about political realities, which is you can't defund Osgood and give the money to U of T Forestry?
Well, you can. That's a challenge. It doesn't have to be an obstacle, and I understand the political challenges. But the fact is, the provinces haven't got the money. The public has. The public sector hasn't got the money. The private sector is in pretty good shape. Cisco, Scotia. If you look at the money what Scotia's making and the taxes we're paying, and we want great people, so let's put the private sector to work, as it should be, and what have you, and move. Now, again, these are all. Sounds kind of easy, but if we don't start taking some sort of shorter-term views and moving things, I don't think there's a politician around who says, help me out of my managing my budget. Well, the private sector, and we saw this on our call to action with the CEOs the last couple of weeks, and we're having some follow-up meetings where a bunch of us said, we will get our companies, with internships or whatever, we will start to provide resources. A, it's in our shareholders' interests. B, we have the financial capability. C, I think we do have some intellectual capacity. And I think there's risks, the governments, the politicians, and everybody who works with them would jump at it.
Is that doable, Linda, what he's just described?
Oh, sure, we could have it done this afternoon. No, but it is a really good point. And, a lot of this is happening. I mean, part of the challenge, of course, is we say if we just had better labor market data, if we just knew who was going to, be needed here. But every time we guess at it, we get it wrong. Right? We produce too many nurses, too few nurses, too many lawyers, too few lawyers. We have an oversupply of IT for a particular moment in time. Now we have an undersupply of IT for a moment in time. So I think it's more complicated than just that, and I think it goes back to this partnership discussion. We need to figure out, I think, as people move through their careers and as job options open and close, how do you speed the retraining of people? How do you figure out, here's the skill set I got from my early education, my current education, how might it fit a different career? How much retraining do I really need? What can I tell an employer about what might be needed? So the folks at the aerospace industry said to us, when they were laying off all those folks at the car companies a few years ago, we needed people in aerospace mechanics, but we didn't know whether you could take people off of a Ford assembly line and train them to do our jobs in 2 months, 3 months, 10 years. We had no idea how their skill sets matched. So I think that's part of the solution. And I think another part of it is something that I'm sure is going on all over the place, but one example I'm familiar with, Siemens right now is working with a couple of our colleges to do something that they do in Germany, which is to say, let's take some engineers and let's make them apprentices so that they understand the skilled trade that's a good match to their engineering background. When we put them on shop floors, let's match an engineer, an IT guy, and a skilled tradesperson, because that's going to produce a higher level of innovation. They'll be cross-trained, and so it produces a better, more well-trained, more flexible workforce. And I think some of those innovations we'll have to think about more.
But if we're not very good at understanding labor market information when we need it, what's the alternative?
Well, so I think we have to use it to the best of our ability, and we have to talk to young people very early about those sorts of things. I think we have to open their minds to other options. One of the things that, interestingly enough, is that when you say the word applied in a high school, if you're in the applied stream, it sounds like a very negative thing. And yet, when you get to post-secondary education into the workplace, applied is a really important positive thing. So to your issue about silos, I think we have to fix that. But I think the other thing we have to do, Steve, is we have to figure out how do we retrain people quickly when their job disappears, or if they graduate from school and the job they expected to be there isn't? How do we figure out a skill set that we can share with employers and they can communicate with, so you know how much retraining is needed? I think there's a lot more that needs to be done just in retooling people's education quickly and not terribly expensively.
Yeah, just to follow up with what Linda was saying is that I definitely believe that, you know, there are gaps in the labor market information. We don't know how long specifically it takes to retrain somebody for another thing, but I think we would all agree that there's a certain set of skills that are applied across the board. And so things that we can start doing earlier, as I believe, is that we need to start giving young people work experience as part of their education.
At what point?
High school. You know, I think if co-op education isn't mandatory, it should be, and I know that it's not. And if everybody in here remembers grade 13, right? Why isn't there a paid year of work experience before a young person chooses their post-secondary pathway? If they had a paid year's worth of experience, my hypothesis is that you would see youth unemployment go down, you would see college and university retention rates go up because the people that are going there would know that they want to be there for a certain thing, and you would see student debt go down, right? So if we can give these young people, here's the deal. Experience is the currency of the work world. And right now, students are leaving high school completely broke. They have no idea what's required once they leave the doors of high school. If we could start giving them just a little bit of work experience, the stuff that can be retooled from position to position, from industry to industry, then we'd be giving them so much more of an advantage once they leave those doors, whatever their post-secondary pathway is.
Nitin, is that a vision you could buy into?
Well, I think getting the high school kids the appropriate grounding in the fundamentals. So, you know, first, I think we got to focus on the fundamentals because those are the skills that are portable to every job. You know, I worry about our mathematics scores going this way really fast over the last 6 years. We got to get the basics right in the early years. Then I think exposing the kids, as Ryan says, to various different things is absolutely a good idea because we can all remember back to when we were in high school, we really didn't know what we were going to do or where the world was going to head it. But today, there's so much information. These kids are so connected. There's opportunities to provide them with insights of what's happening, you know, through the social media channels, and there's all sorts of channels we can do. So I think the sooner we can expose them to different things so they can make intelligent decisions, not only from their likes perspective, but where we think the world is going in terms of where the gaps are going to be. The world is changing at such a fast pace right now. And if you think about, you know, and I, you know, technology is something I know, but I'm just going to go back to it just for a second, because where we've come to today, over the last 25 years with the advent of the internet, we've done all this by connecting less than 1% of things that can be connected. Every industry, including education and healthcare and everything else, is going to be transformed dramatically by technology, whether it's banking, whether it's healthcare, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's forestry. I just came back from a meeting in Winnipeg where they were showing, you know, how agriculture is currently changing and what's on a combine now, right? There's an iPad and a GPS connection and things along those lines. Those basic jobs are changing in a dramatic way. We have to communicate that back, and then we have to give that vision to the kids so they know how they can stream themselves to their likes and also where the jobs are going to be. And if we don't have the flexibility in the education system, we're going to be left behind. Our statistics, as far as Canada is concerned, they're not very good in terms of innovation and productivity.
So whose responsibility is to get that right?
Well, I think we got to start off by getting the fundamentals right, and we can't be falling off the cliff on you know, things like maths and sciences and even liberal arts and history. The grounding has got to get done, and then we've got to understand through the education system how to be flexible. The curriculums are pretty set. I know as Cisco, we've tried to change curriculums. We've tried to get in and talk to people. It's not an easy process. I think you started off by saying it's a very long sales cycle. But we have, you know, industry has something positive to say in terms of the kind of curriculum, not specific to one company, but specific to an industry, right?
That post-grade 12 year you just talked about, just tell us a little more about that. How would that, who's paying for the students to work where? How does that work?
Yeah, so I see that this would be something that the government would subsidize. Maybe they pay half the wage of the company. It would cost, what, $1 billion to put all the grade 12 students into a semester of work experience. Let the companies match some of that. Let the companies match some of that money. so that when the students leave that, they leave with work experience and they leave with money in the bank. So no matter what their next decision is, they're a little bit more prepared for that. But it would be very similar to a co-op type placement, but they'd be getting paid for it. And they get to learn those fundamentals, and they get to see, like, this isn't like coffee grabbing work. This is work that requires, you know, a little bit of training, and then they allow them to see some facet of that business, maybe even have like a level up experience somewhere through that experience, and then leave with a knowledge of an industry, a workplace, how to work, how to interact, what receiving a paycheck is like, because a lot of the students these days aren't receiving paychecks because they're not working while they're in high school. So let's give them a leg up. I think there's nothing to lose by giving kids work experience.
Well, would there be a concern that if they enjoyed their work too much, they might want to stay and not go off to post-secondary at all?
Great. Let them get started on a career. And if they get 4 years in and they realize they missed a step and they need education, now they have money to pay for that education. That's a fantastic place to be in.
How does that sound to you?
Well, it's an interesting challenge because they have more money to pay for the education, but they may have a mortgage by then and maybe a family. So I think there is a big challenge in figuring out how you deliver education to people mid-career who have a whole lot of financial obligations. But, you know, the challenge too is we are sending a lot of young people to post-secondary that we didn't used to, and I think we're right to do that. I mean, I think it's important that more and more people have post-secondary education, but we, I think, forgot that when we add more and more people to the post-secondary system, we need to think really clearly about what their career path looks like, because when very few people were going, it was easy to get a job. Now there's a lot of folks graduating, and I think it does require, I think it's a really interesting, innovative idea, because a lot of students say to us, the big problem for me going to college is your offerings are so specific to a career, I don't know how to figure it out. So that's one way to fill a gap. Another way, we're sending teachers to a second year of teachers college now. Why not give them a lot more training in career counseling? Why not make sure that instead of those career counseling programs where you bring in somebody and they talk for 15 minutes about my parent's job, why not do a really robust career counseling for students right through public school and high school, so that when they start to make good decisions, they have a really clear sense of the range of options open to them, which I don't think they do now.
Have you suggested that to anybody?
We've suggested it to the minister, and I hear she's coming, so we can suggest it again.
Do you know how she feels about it?
I think it's an interesting thing that they're contemplating, but I think it takes some thought.
Nitin.
You know, I think post-secondary, as people go into post-secondary, helping them stream themselves correctly is very important, because what we're seeing, a lot of it is people go through a certain program at universities, then they realize they can't get a job, then they go back to a college to get a skill. That's a 4-year delay into what they were trying to do. So there's a real opportunity. The other thing is, I think the nature of work is changing dramatically as we go forward. There isn't the case where you're going to graduate, start with a company, work for 30 years, hopefully become CEO. Those kind of days are long behind us, right? And I think the ability to produce entrepreneurs in Canada, we have to raise that in a dramatic fashion. And so I know in certain high schools, in certain places, they teach entrepreneurship, but who's teaching them that, right? We should be lining up entrepreneurs to teach entrepreneurship into the high schools and colleges, and that's not happening. I think it's going to be very important, because the kids coming out now are going to have multiple experiences, possibly working for themselves, working for a company. Who's preparing them for all of that? Because that's the world of tomorrow. In fact, you could say that's the world of today already.
I want to get Rick's reaction to Ryan's idea, which is the notion that the private sector would be brought on board in a much more hands-on way to be a partner in educating young people after their high school careers were over, but before their post-secondary careers began. What do you think?
Absolutely, and this is called the Learning Partnership. We all talked about partners, and if one group is not in line with the other, we're not going to solve this problem, and it has got to be a partnership. And you asked who's accountable. We're all accountable, and we got to do some work on that accountability and match incentives and what I said. But it's got to be a partnership. How you do it, there's no silver bullet, and we all know that. I wish there was a silver bullet, and it's going to be a lot of individual initiatives, collective on that. Akila can talk obviously for herself, but my first part with the Learning Partnership, I think we always take your kid to work. Yeah. What a great thing that was, to take your kid to work. And I think that is still, I think a lot of us all participate on it. Now we got to do more on that. So there was an idea about a year ago, take your class to work. And I saw the prototype of it now, and this is going to be a web-based internet where it's all there that that teacher can actually have a really good discussion and with all the bells and whistles about what it does mean about getting a job and getting a career and getting business. How much of that discussion, and this could be at whatever, high school or even below. And so here's just one initiative using all the great internet kind of stuff. It was an idea from the private sector and who provided the funding for it, but the learning partnership with all the educators are putting the content in. We need more of that innovation, okay, at that kind of rule. And so that's what I guess, and as for the funding, I hate the word, I know you didn't use it, let's ask the government to subsidize it. If government's got to subsidize it, I mean, there are things that they have to do in education, and we're all for that, but we have to have sustainable funding. And so it has to be sustainable. And I guess in education, you may never get sustainable, but we have to realize you can't keep going back to government and asking for money because they haven't got it, and that's a big problem in Ontario and Quebec and throughout, the provinces in that.
But do you think the private sector, you talked about take your class to work. Do you think the private sector would sign on to put your class to work? Which is what he's saying.
We had this discussion at the CEO Summit, and there's other members here. We said we'll commit resources and we'll commit internships and we'll work at that. Now, can we hire? I mentioned when the Governor General went down and got the universities to commit 10,000 positions at universities for the Brazilians to come to school. Then part of it was the universities wanted us, the private sector, to provide 10,000 internships for some of or whatever the number was. Well, that just ain't on. I mean, we'll take 50 or we'll take 25. So this is where it's all going to work out, and this is where the dialogue's got to go into.
Okay, did you want one more word on this, and then I want to go to the audience for questions.
Yeah, just really quick. I want to be clear that this isn't just an education problem, that this really is a three-sided problem that involves education, government, and community. And I definitely believe that the community plays a huge role in these type of problems. And this doesn't need to be something that a national organization steps in and says, yeah, we'll commit to bringing on 10,000 high school students or whatever it happens to be. There's a fantastic think tank done a couple of years ago down in Chicago where they contemplated what is education, what is the purpose of education. And one of the prevailing thoughts of the day was that students in education should almost kind of belong to the community while they're in school. And the way that they can get their work experience while they're in school is that they solve community problems. So maybe it isn't taking on 10,000 interns or 10,000 students, but maybe it's issuing certain challenges to the community for young people to start to put their minds and their efforts to, and then they still leave with a portfolio of experience when they leave a traditional education environment.
And yet the government of Ontario raided a couple of magazines last week and they shut down their internship programs. Was that a good idea?
You know what? I am not about unpaid internships by any means, because I think that they're being taken advantage of in certain instances. I don't know the ins and outs of every single one of those, but I definitely believe that volunteering has a huge role to play in gathering work experience.
Nitin, you wanted to add?
Just one point, from what's happening in the world. Things are changing so fast that every company, every public sector organization has a real danger of being disintermediated. If you look at, I'll give you simple examples. You look at what's happening in the TV world, right? People talk about cutting the cord off, coming over the top. Banking is different ways to do banking, different ways to do healthcare. Quite frankly, there's different ways to do education. You have online universities. You've got people like Khan Academy. These people are reinventing the way you do education. So, either what's the famous line out of Thomas Friedman's book? I'll paraphrase it, right? What can be done will be done. Will you do it, or will it get done to you? And honestly, that's where the world's at. And education is not, education's part of all of that. We have a system that works really well, takes us to a certain point, but it's not prepared for the future.
Linda?
So let me give you just one small optimistic example of the sort of things that are going on and that Ryan just talked about. One of our colleges has partnered with the Trillium Foundation that's used to giving grants out for things, and they decided they wanted to be more embedded in making a difference. So what they did is they joined the college, the community that needed a new, a renovation, a very big renovation to their theater, but couldn't afford it, couldn't get government funding to do it, and the students, the apprentices So the apprentices went in, they renovated the theater, it gave them work experience. They can now in their community say, there's a building that I helped to change, and Trillium Foundation put up the money to manage the cost. So there's
and
an
they got paid
example.
for their work?
And they got paid for
And
their
they got
work. So
paid.
there's an interesting example of the kind of innovation when everybody works together that's achievable. So, you know, some note of optimism, Steve.
Okay. We got time for a few questions to take
Just a
from the floor?
couple, maybe.
Yeah, a couple. Okay, right here, please. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Sherry Campbell. I'm with Frontier College. We're a national literacy organization, not a college. Oh, thanks. And one of our biggest growth areas have been in First Nations communities. And so Aboriginal youth are one of the fastest growing demographics in Canada. Lowest high school completion rate. 60% of First Nations people don't have the basic literacy knowledge they need to participate in a knowledge economy. High unemployment. And also lack of access to any kind of technologies. But yet fundamental to Canada, and especially the growth in natural resource sectors, is that they participate and benefit from that development. What can we be doing better, or where should we be doing better to ensure that they are able to participate and have access to the kinds of jobs and growth and success in education?
Nitin, you want to talk about what you're doing in Nunavut?
Yeah. Well, actually, we've got our leader on that project, Willa Black, in the room somewhere here, but look, we completely agree with you, and the ability to get remote communities participating in the economy is very important. It starts with education. So we're currently running a program called Connected North, where we're utilizing our video and collaboration technologies to provide education for those students, provide education for the teachers, and actually connect those students into students in the South, where they're actually doing lessons plans together. And what we're seeing very quickly is attendance rates are going up. The teachers are really getting warm to all of this. And technology is not the issue anymore. It's about business process change. And Will and I were just talking, if we were to hit 10 schools in Nunavut, because we're doing this in Kawale right now, that would be 25% of that population of that particular sector. So what we're doing is we're trying to get our partners, our customers to join with us and adopt the school to see if we can scale this. But we're certainly hoping that the mainstream will pick up on this and say this is the way of the future.
George.
I want to thank the panel. I think we've had great discussion. I'm going to actually maybe comment more than question. The previous panel and this panel talked a lot about what needs to change. There was a lob to me. I'm going to take advantage of that lob earlier. Lots has changed. I think we need to acknowledge, I think last year at this panel, I talked about our growth in co-op. We've gone up exponentially. Lots of kids are getting co-op opportunities. We need to do more. That was my challenge actually to the Learning Partnership. How many of your companies have co-op students? So the challenge we've had, when we talked about mandating, we can't get enough employers for the volunteer co-ops right now. If we mandate it, we need the private sector and the public sector to step up, the NGOs. So that's something we need to think about. Practical experience for sure is in demand. We need to give those students the opportunity. We talked about changes. We've had dual credits. We have opportunities for college courses to be taught to our high school students. They're actually finishing high school and getting advanced credit in college. We have the high skills majors. We started with 6, construction being one of them, aviation, hospitality, more geared again to the workforce, giving them opportunities to actually get exposed to the workforce early to decide whether they want to do it before they spend 4 more years somewhere else saying, I hate this, why did I do this? Again, we need employers and others to step up for that opportunity. It's a community responsibility. We talked about it takes a village to educate a child. This is the community discussion we need to have. What role are we going to play? Training. I think we have a short memory. If we think we had more skills than our kids have today, I'd like us to pull our grade 12 papers out. And you know what? This is the dilemma. I remember professors when I was in university saying, we're not teaching properly in high school. We don't have the right students coming to us. We had employers. Do you actually think employers were spending less time than training than our employers today? The expectation was you were going to train your employees. Now we actually expect our students to come out trained. That's not going to happen. So we need to actually think through these. These sound like simple answers. They're not, because we can identify the problems. Who's going to do it? Fiscally, Rick's right. There's nobody running on a platform of increasing taxes. to do more and more of these things.
Actually, the current government.
Well, on transit, on transit. But on the education sector.
For transit, maybe. But
yeah, transit. For health and education,
Yeah.
there's tons of money. It's about using it more productively. So I think the challenge we have is, so, you know, we've got these ideas. We know that we need more practical experience. Who's stepping up? How are we going to move this forward? I would also say we had the opportunity, as Steve mentioned, the government released the vision paper, and that was based on consultations. And we heard a lot about changing the system from students. They were the best voices, actually. It was amazing to hear the voices of the students, how articulate they were, what they needed, going back to the customer. And it was actually a little bit disheartening that other community people didn't realize the changes we've already made. And the students were the ones to point them out. We have high skills major, we have co-op. We're doing more project-based learning. That was one of the things, by the way. People wanted less subject learning, more collaborative learning opportunities that were going to be cross-curricular and project-based. And that measures the types of things employers are looking at. Very, very few employers call to say, can you send me your top student in math? What do? They ask, send me somebody who can collaborate, who communicates well, who shows up on time. And those are the things that we're starting to look at measuring, not just literacy and numeracy, the collaboration, communication skills. We'll talk a bit more about PISA, elaborating more on that. So I think there are two things. Lots of change is occurring, even in the secondary, post-secondary system. We are asking universities and colleges not to be everything to everybody, right? So I'm not here for training. Yeah, I'm not here for training colleges and universities, but the government has asked, you know what? Pick a specialty. We need to specialize and be able to compete with those post-secondary educational opportunities that occur in other countries. So we need to get good and we need to get excellent. So I think lots has occurred. Here's the issue. We know there's a million things we could change. The issue is what's the four most important for us to focus on? And that's what we challenge the Learning Partnership. What four things can the Learning Partnership do? That's the other point I would say. 20 years ago, we would not be talking about learning. We would have talked about teaching. What are we asking teachers to teach our kids? We've now flipped that and said, okay, our job is actually to help our students learn. That's different. And that's what Michael Fulham was talking about. There's huge investments that have been made in pedagogical change. And the best way for us to actually see the results we want is to help our teachers learn to teach kids to learn.
Okay, George, just before that's a great intervention. Thank you. Anybody want to react to anything that we've heard from George? Go ahead, Ryan, then Linda.
Yeah, just really quickly, the changes that people propose, they're super daunting and they sound huge, but I think that one thing we can absolutely get better at with education is the testing and iterating portion of things, where we have an idea for something and we deploy it somewhere and we get the quick feedback and we iterate on it and then we deploy it again in a different version, in a different form. And I just think that education has been a little bit slow moving in that. And this isn't me ragging on education, this is just me saying that businesses have made a change now with the technological advancements to test really quickly, to iterate really quickly, and deploy another version. And I think education can do the exact same thing.
Linda?
Just to say, you're right, we're remiss in not talking about the great things that have happened. I mean, dual credits takes a whole bunch of students who probably would fail right into high school, but who teachers think are promising, and takes them into the program that George described. And we have a 90% success rate with those young people. It's a staggering change. Second career, people who were unemployed, laid off in the recession, and took time to grieve about the loss of their career, went back to school, sat in classrooms with kids their kids' age, had probably a lousy experience in their first go-around in school, and went back committed. And again, we have about a 74% employment rate of those people coming out of second career programs. So lots has changed, lots been done. Again, real reasons for optimism.
Let's
Just
thank the panel. That
tremendous.
was great. Thank you.
A round of applause to the panelists. If I could ask you just to stay seated just for one moment. And a very, very big thank you to Steve. Really, really appreciate your skills in helping us discover and explore these issues today.